Something that really interests me in my clinical work is helping people to fall asleep and offering ideas on how they can fall asleep that perhaps sound really weird initially, but because of the way the brain works and the way that we process things, they actually work, even though they're very paradoxical. So, an example of this is if you want to fall asleep and you're really struggling to fall asleep, try to stay awake. So that may sound really weird. I want to fall asleep. Why would I try to stay awake? But pretty much everyone has had the experience when there's going to be a film on late at night and you really want to watch the film. So you're very motivated to stay awake because you really, really want to watch the film. But you get more and more tired the closer it gets to that film being on. Almost like somehow there's something that's trying to say, because you want to watch the film, you're going to get tired and fall asleep. And so the more you're trying to stay awake and the more you're fighting that need to sleep, the more tired you actually start getting until eventually you do fall asleep. And yet the flip side is also true, that if you think, I'm going to get an early night tonight because I've got to be up really early in the morning, you go to bed early because you want to get an early night, and yet you toss and turn all night long, you can't fall asleep, and you go to sleep much, much later than you normally would have done had you gone to bed on time. So the way that our brains work is often very paradoxical. So when someone with insomnia is lying there tossing and turning, thinking, I really want to fall asleep, I want to fall asleep, I need to sleep, I need to sleep, I need to sleep, all they end up doing is staying awake. Whereas if instead they start focusing on trying to stay awake, normally that's when they feel tired and fall asleep. So some things you can do are, for example, if you're not asleep, say you wanted to go to sleep at 10 p.m. and go to bed at 10 p.m, maybe be asleep by 20 past, half past 10. What you would do is, if you're not asleep by half past 10, you would get up and do something incredibly boring for the entire night. So this obviously is quite an extreme sounding thing, but this is for someone with extreme insomnia. So say you normally try to go to bed at 10 at night, and if you're lucky you're normally asleep by say 3 in the morning, and then you're normally asleep for maybe 10-15 minutes before you wake up, and then you go back to sleep again, then you wake up again, you go back to sleep again, and then you're up at 7. And so for the entire night you've perhaps got 2 hours sleep for the whole night. Then going to bed at 10, not being asleep at 10:30, and so staying awake for the entire night, refusing to go to sleep, you only lose 2 hours sleep. So you might think to yourself that logically, well, I don't lose 2 hours sleep because I should be asleep at 10:30 and I should wake up at, say, 7 a.m. And so I lose that many hours sleep. But the reality is, if that's the ideal scenario, if your reality is you go to bed at 10, you should be asleep at 10:30, you get to sleep at 3, you don't sleep very soundly between 3 and when you wake up, and so between 3 and when you wake up you've only had 2 hours sleep in that short period of time. What you've really lost compared to your normal amount of sleep is just 2 hours sleep. And yet that's an incredibly powerful intervention, as long as you don't then sleep all day. So you need to carry on with your next day like normal. And just set it as a pattern that if I'm not asleep at this time, I don't go to sleep for the whole night. And there are different things you can do when you're awake. So one thing you can do, for example, is if there's something that's playing on your mind and you think that's something that's behind why you're struggling to sleep, so, I don't know, say tax returns, then what you do is you do your tax returns all night long. So then that isn't something to worry about on another night. So sometimes you can use those hours and think, okay, I'm going to use those hours that if I'm not asleep, I'll do something that I procrastinate on. I'll do something that I always put off doing because I find it so boring, so tedious. I worry about it because I know I don't want to do it, and so I put it off and put it off and put it off. And so it's always in my mind, but I just don't ever get around to doing it. I'll do those things. So it could be cleaning the house, it could be getting certain chores done or certain jobs done, it could be getting tax returns done, whatever it happens to be. It could be getting some, maybe the first draft of a novel done, whatever. So what you do is you then make use of that time to do something that's quite boring, something that you normally put off and try to avoid doing. And what you're then doing is teaching yourself that at those times when you're not asleep, it's a sign that you need to get something done that's boring. There are other things you can do like that are equally as boring if you don't have a task or something to do. So you can do things like perhaps stand in the living room reading a dictionary from page 1 and just read all night long. So you don't want like a nice page-turning novel to read all night long that'll engage you. You want something that hopefully, if it was me, I'd find a dictionary enjoyable reading, but I probably wouldn't find it as enjoyable as perhaps if I was reading an encyclopedia or something. So the idea is that it's something that you're not finding too enjoyable, that you're just doing, thinking, oh, I wish I wasn't doing this. This is getting a bit tedious now, that kind of thing. And so what you're doing is just setting up your brain to associate being awake with doing these tedious things and getting jobs done and getting things out of the way, and being asleep and rested soundly with what you really want to do. If you've got any comments or any views, or you give this technique a go and you want to feed back how you got on with it, remember you have to do it every time that you have to set it as your routine. So every time you don't fall asleep, you do this routine. Not you just do this routine when it suits you, or you do it once and then decide the next day, oh, it didn't work. And the important thing is that then for the whole next day, you get up at the time, you're awake at the time you're supposed to be awake. You go through the whole day awake like normal, and then you go to bed at your normal time that night, and you repeat the same thing. So if you go to bed at 10 o'clock that night, and perhaps you didn't sleep the previous night, then if you're awake at 10:30, you do the same again. You don't go to sleep. So the important thing to note is to make sure that you only do this when it's safe to do so. So if, for example, your job involves a lot of driving, you don't want to be so tired you fall asleep at the wheel. But the chances are that if you're sleep deprived, then if you've only had, say, 2 hours sleep a night, you're probably best not driving in the first place, because you're only getting 2 hours sleep a night and you're very tired. So getting 0 hours sleep versus getting 2 hours sleep is probably not going to make a lot of difference. But in both situations, driving is probably not an advisable thing, same as operating difficult machinery or dangerous machinery or anything like that. So you want to make sure you're doing this safely, and some people have a turnaround really quickly with success. Other people, it could be 3, 4, 5 nights in where you've not had a night's sleep yet because you're doing this process, before you then zonk out one night and just sleep soundly for a whole night, and then kick your sort of sleep patterns back into order, how they should be. So if you found this interesting or helpful, just give it a thumbs up, and if you've got any comments or anything you'd like to ask, then leave a comment below in the comments section. And to be kept informed of other Mind Changers videos, just click on the subscribe button, and if you select the bell button, then you'll be informed when a new video goes live. And we post videos every Friday.